Today's daf is daf Samach Dalid b'siyata d'shmai, but we finished up before the end of Samach Gimel Amid Beis, and that's where we're going to start where we left off, and that's the sugya of breaking up idolatry. Yosiv Rav Nachman Vi'ua. So we're counting up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up before the end of Samach Gimel Amid Beis. Ve'avimi bar Pavi Yosiv Rabbi Chia bar Ami Gabayu. There's a whole discussion here in Tosas, which I don't feel is so relevant to us. He wants to know whenever it says that there were certain Amoraim, and it lists, and then it says there was another Amora who was sitting near them, then usually it means that that Amora is going to add something to discussion, and that would be in our case Rabbi Chia, but Rabbi Chia doesn't really add anything. So Tos has a whole discussion that elsewhere Rabbi Chia did add something, so whatever. So this is the question that they were curious about, that they addressed. Scharo lishbar b'yayin nesech mahu. Normally, a person is not allowed to take a wage. A Jewish person can't take a wage for working with yayin nesech, because then the wages that he's paid are a hana that he gets from the yayin nesech that he's working on, and yayin nesech is also b'hana. But what about a case where he's being hired to break down these barrels? Maybe they need the wine to be taken out or whatever it might be. And as a result, let's say the wine will spill, it'll get destroyed. So here, he's not getting hana from the ayin nesech. On the contrary, he's getting hana from the breaking of the barrels of the ayin nesech. However, bi'amrina keva derotze b'kiyumo asur. He wants these barrels of yayin nesach to remain extant as long as possible. He doesn't want them broken now because he wants to get paid for breaking them, so he doesn't want them to break. And that's called rotze b'kiyumo. He wants the yayin nesach to be in existence. And in Isuri Hana, the Gemara thinks that maybe it's prohibited to want the Isuri Hana to be in existence. You have to want to destroy the Isuri Hana. When the Torah tells you to destroy the Isuri Hana, the Torah is implying that you should not want them to exist. And therefore, perhaps, he has no halachic uh, heter for taking money for doing this job of breaking the barrels, because he wants the barrels to be extant. Odim, what should we say? Tifla, shaper dami. Maybe the halacha says that we want to destroy idolatry. Tifla, which is futility, is a word that Chazal use as a derogatory word for Avoda Zara. We want to get rid of Avoda Zara. So if he could take this job and destroy the Avodah Zarah, Adrabah, we're very happy about that. The Torah would not prohibit this. Rav Nachman Yishbar v'Tov. In other words, Rav Nachman accepts this principle called Kol Lemu'ute Tifla Shapir Domi, and when the Torah normally would prohibit you to want something to exist, and you want it to exist so that you could destroy it, well, if it's idolatry, then the Torah wants you to destroy it, and therefore you're allowed to do so. Lema misayel. And now the Gemara is going to try to bring a brisa to support the shita of Rav Nachman, that kol limu'ute tifla shapir dam. And now we're going to stretch our arm out to the laws of kilayim. Kilayim meaning if he plants two categories, two species of vegetables or fruits in close proximity to each other. And the Torah says, Sodcha lo tizra kilayim, pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim. So the Torah does not want us to plant these two species in close proximity, and that's a violation of Sodcha lo tizra kilayim. But now, what happens if a guy has plants of different species near each other, close proximity, and he wants to hire the Jew to do whatever is necessary to improve the plants so that they'll produce more and more? And the Brisa says that Eina Odrim im Ovei Kol Chavim V'Kalayim. You cannot take a job if you're Jewish to do this kind of hoeing around the plants that are kilayim, because kilayim is osur behana, pentukdash hamalea. From that word we learn that you're not allowed to get any benefit from kilayim, and now he's getting benefit from kilayim, and even the kilayim that's growing in the field that's owned by Goy, that's also osur behana, that's also included in kilayim, and now you're going to get wages for improving kilayim. And therefore, it says here, Ein Odrim, you're not allowed to take that job. You're not allowed to be paid for your hoeing around the kilayim, the field of kilayim of the idlers. And now we start our daf for today, Samach Tav. Aval okrim imo kidei lema'ute es hatifla. When it comes to Isuri Hanoah, like Kilaya Kerem, the Torah wants us to get rid of it. And therefore, if the Jew is going to be hired la'akar, la'akar means to pull out the kilayim from the ground, to uproot it, then adarabba, that's allowed, even though he's getting paid for it, because we want to get rid of this kilayim. And this is another expression of, or another reflection of the principle of Rav Nachman, kol lemu'utei tifla shaper dami. And the Gemara says, Savrua, when they brought this raya to prove Rav Nachman from the Brisa, they thought, Mani, who is the author of the Brisa? Rabbi Akiva, he, the Amar Makayim B'Kalayim Lokif. Rabbi Akiva's shita is that although the Torah says explicitly, Sadchalo Tizra Kilayim, which prohibits the planting, Rabbi Akiva says any mental connection that you have with this kilayim, that you want it to exist, is a prohibition. Again, when it says here that you get malchus for that, I mean, that depends on lav shem bo maisa, whether lokin or lav, and that's the sugya makis. Let's say Rashi seems to imply that he does a maisa to demonstrate how much he wants the kilayim to exist, and he puts up a fence around the kilayim to protect the kilayim. And Rabbi Akiva says that if you put up a fence around kilayim in order to continue and maintain the existence of the kilayim, you get malchus for that. And now at this point, the Gemara thinks that the author of this brisa that allows you to take a job to uproot kilayim, even though you're getting paid wages for it, and it's not considered a violation, so no, because called the tifla is lemute tifla shapir dami, and that's the proof from Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva would have to prohibit this. If he's getting paid to work in a field of kilayim, he wants the kilayim to exist. Otherwise, they don't need him, and he's not going to get paid. He's not going to get hired for the job. And the answer must be that we could be matir the iser of makayim kilayim through this principle called kol lemute tifla shapir dami. This Sanya, where do we have Rabbi Akiva's shita? In a brisa, Merakesh v'amachaper b'kalayim lokeh. If he does work in the ground, like for example, he pulls out the weeds, he covers the seeds with earth, which is called machaper. In all these cases, he's fostering the growth of the kilayim. That's called a violation of lo tizra kilayim, sadchol lo tizra. Comes along Rabbi Akiva, and he goes a major step further, and he says, "Amakayim v'kalayim lokeh." He doesn't have to do anything that encourages and improves the productivity of the kilayim, the growth of the kilayim. As long as he maintains the existence of kilayim, that per se is enough to violate a chiyuv malchus, according to Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara asks, "My Taiba de Rabbi Kiva, where did Rabbi Kiva derive this conclusion from?" It's a very unique kind of concept in the world of halacha that just because you want something to exist, you get malchus, you violate a law. Omar cross sadchalo tizra kelaim. Ainli elizorea makayim minayin tamid lomar lo kelaim. So it comes out like this, that when the Torah says behem tchalo tarbia kelaim, sadchalo tizra kelaim, so the Torah sort of repeats itself in a superfluous way because it says lo twice, lo tarbia kilayim, lo tizra kilayim. It could have said it in one full swoop with one lo. So the second lo allows us to restructure the pasuk and read it as if it says sadcha lo, lo with an alf, meaning you don't want that sada to exist. I'm sorry, let me say it a little better. You read it kilayim sadcha lo, kilayim sadcha lo. The ilu lemute tifla shari. And yet, in this case, where the Jew is being hired to uproot the kilayim and destroy it, then it's mutter, even though he wants it on at least on a temporary basis to exist, so that he can do his job, get paid his wages for uprooting the kilayim. Now, again, we're always under time constraint, but if we had more time, I would try to explain why the Gemara identifies this brisa of al okrim imo with Rabbi Akiva, not with the Chachamim. The Gemara now is going to approach and suggest the possibility that this brisa was authored by the Chacham Hamani, lo Hamani, Rabbanani. The Rabbanan hold that you're allowed to maintain kilayim. There's no iser of maintaining kilayim of rotza b'kiyumo. The Chacham didn't have that drasha of Rabbi Akiva. And therefore, we really understand very well that even though this person who's being paid to uproot the kilayim on a temporary basis, at least he wants the kilayim to exist, there's no prohibition, there's no issue. So Gemara says, "I Rabbanan, my area okrid afilu kiyumei nami shaper dami." Why did the Bryce have to give me a low profile chiddush, low ebb chiddush that he's being hired to rip out the kilayim, and therefore it's rotze. I keep forgetting the exact phrase, so I want to get it. Kol le'mu'ute tifla shaper dami. Just going to write it down for myself. Kol le'mu'ute tifla. Forget about kol le'mu'ute tifla. Just simply say if he wants to maintain the kilayim, then it's mutter according to the Chacham. So the Gemara says no. This price is really the Rabbanan. And if you'll ask me, according to the Rabbanan, why take this case of a person who's being hired to uproot the kilayim? And the answer is, he wants to work for free. The Jew is not taking money. He's working gratis. For Rabbi Yehuda, the Torah says lo tichanem, and Rabbi Yehuda derives from lo tichanem that we're not allowed to give them a matnaschina. We can't give a gift to a guy. Oh, so now we're going to apply the principle which I wrote down here: kol le'mu'ute tifla shaper dami. Meaning, although Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to give a gift to the guy, but if you're going to destroy something which the Torah wants to destroy, like kilayim, then shaper dami, it's okay, it's mutter. So Gemara says, "Mid Rabbi Yehuda nishma leRabbi Akiva, lav ham Rabbi Yehuda also litein lemat naschino, aval emute tifla shaper dami is Rabbi Akiva nami afal gav the Rabbi Akiva makayim b'kalayim loke lemute tifla shaper dami." So we're going to apply this principle of kol lemute tifla shaper dami in two contexts. Number one, according to Rabbi Yehuda, with regard to the violation of lotitin lematnas chinam. And we're going to say that even though you're giving them a favor, let's say, for example, you're working for them for free, but you're being oker, you're uprooting kilayim, and therefore it's considered lemute tifla. And shaper domi, and we're going to apply that same principle to Rabbi Akiva in the case of kilayim, where you're being paid to uproot the kilayim, and therefore we're going to say that, you know what, even though Rabbi Akiva holds that lekaimis hakilayim is a lav, but if you're destroying the kilayim, then it's mut. Even though on a temporary basis you really want it to exist. Now, if we take this back to our case of Yayin Nesech, then we could say the following. If he's being hired to break the barrels that hold the Yayin Nesech, and the Yayin Nesech will go down the drain, it'll be destroyed, then, although he's getting wages for working with Yayin Nesech, in which case he's benefiting from the Yayin Nesech, which normally should be asur, but nevertheless we're going to be matir because kol l'ma'utei tifla shaper domi, as we saw in Rabbi Yehuda, when you give the gift to the guy. The sulo midi, that's a seal at the end of a sugya, v'sulo midi, meaning don't ask me any questions because this is absolutely acceptable. Hoda Yosef becoming boile. Now, the same Amoraim asked a different question. To me avodas kochavim biad avodas kochavim mal mi tofeses domer biad ovi kochavim lo. So now we're talking about an Oved Kochav, an idolater who sells his idol. You see that they didn't have that much loyalty to the idols. You know, money speaks louder than anything else, so they sold the idol. And now the question is, when the guy sells the idol, he gets money in payment. Is that money that he receives in payment for saving the idol, is that tfisas damim? It has the same status as Avoda Zara, and it's also bano. Amalu Rav Nachman, mistabra dmei avodas kochavim v'yad ovi kochav mutarim. I'm going to derive a conclusion, we'll see in a minute from whence, says Rav Nachman, that there's no tfisas damim over here. And when the seller gets paid for selling an idol, that money is mutter. Midahanu the asal kami Rabbi Baravu. So there was a group of people that came to Rabbi Avoda, and they asked him to be megayer them. These were goyim who wanted to convert to Judaism. Omar lahu, he says to them, you know what? I'm going to see. Let me test you out first of all. See if you want to become Jewish. Zilus vidu kalmadi asti islechu v'su is gaira. Take all your idols and all the Meshamshei Avoda Zara and sell them. Get rid of them. And then come back and I'll accept you as Gerut. Now there are 2 points going on over here. Number one, the Chachamim, in this case, Rabbi Baravu, wanted to test them to see if they're really cutting themselves off from Avodah Zarah, they're willing to sell all their idols. And number two, those idols, although they remain asur, yet the money that was gotten is mutter for the ger after he's misgayer. So he doesn't have to lose all the financial investments that he had in buying these idols and building these idols. All that money he has in his bank account because he's allowed to sell them. Now, wait a second. What do you mean? He's allowed to sell them and what? And take the money and use it as a Jew? That money is asur bana, right? That money is chalipe avodah zara. My time of the answer is mishum dekasav b'tmei avodas kocham b'yad avodas kocham mutarim. We don't hold that there's tfisas damim in a case of a guy who sells his idol to another guy, and the money that he receives in payment is not asur, and therefore this was a great eitzah that Rabbah gave this potential ger that he should sell all his idols, take the money, put it in the bank account, and he can enjoy the benefit of this money after he becomes a ger. So the Gemara thinks from this that we can answer and support Rav Nachman's answer to the original question that Tmei Avodas Kol Chavim, B'yad Avodas Kol Chavim is mutter. So the Gemara asks, wait a minute, I don't get the analogy. It's not a fair analogy. V'dil Mashani Hasam, the came of the daite li igure is therefore vade batla. Maybe the fact that these goyim had intentions to convert to Judaism, therefore they were certainly mevatel the avodas kocham. I mean, here we get into a whole discussion whether bittul b'lev is enough or you need to do a maisa, but whatever they have to do, they'll do because now they are gerim. So in that case, you have no right to derive the conclusion about dvei avodas kochavim biyad ovid kochavim because there is no ovid kochavim. There is no idol here because he was mevatel the idol. Elami, maybe we can bring support from Nachman from a different source. So Steve joined us. I just want to tell you, Steve, we're about 1/3 down on page Samach Dalet. Elami hacha Yisrael shaya no shebiyovikol money. So a guy owes money which he borrowed presumably from a Jew. Now the guy wants to pay back the Jew. I don't know if he wants to or they're forcing him to, and he has no cash. So what does he do? He sells his idols. The money that he got from his idols, he's going to give to the Jew as payment for an outstanding loan. Alternatively, the Bryce has a case of Yayin Nesech Vehevilo. The guy who's the lover who borrowed money sells his yayin esech on the market. The money that he gets in payment, he gives over to the Jew because he had borrowed money from the Jew, and the Jew's allowed to use that money. Volim Omar Lo, but if the agreement between the idol worshiper and the Jew was a little bit different, Hamtein li aje emkar avos kochavi avilecha. He tells him explicitly when the Jew comes to demand payment for the loan, the guy says to him, you know what? Wait a little while. I'm going to sell my idols and I'll pay you back with the money that I get from the idols. Or yayin esech, I'm going to sell my yayin esech on the open market and then the money that I get at I'll give to you. Oh, so that's already prohibited. Now, why is it prohibited? For that, we have to wait for the Gemara. Maishna Reisho, Maishna Seifa. Omer of Sheshes Seifa Mishum Dahavi Le Kirotze Bekiyumo. What happens over here? In the Seifa, the guy who's the lover who borrowed money from the Jew says to the Jew, you know, wait a while. I'm going to sell these idols. It's very important for the Jew that the idol remain in existence, extant, because otherwise the guy who owes the money is not going to be able to sell the idols. So it's rotza b'kiyuma. And therefore in the Sefer, it's awesome. Now, we've had Rotza B'Kiyuma with regard to the Kilayim. Now we have Rotza B'Kiyuma with regard to Avodah Zara. Meaning, since the Torah commands us to destroy Avodah Zara, to uproot it from the land, certainly the Torah doesn't want us to maintain the Avodah Zara. We want to get rid of it and destroy it. And therefore, we generate an Isur of Makayim Avodah Zara. And that's called Rotza B'Kiyumo in the language of the Shas. Fekti Gemara v'chi Rotza B'Kiyumo ki hay gavna mi asur. I'm going to quote to you a Mishnah Masechta D'mai, and I'm going to prove from that Mishnah that even if you're Rotza B'Kiyumo, in the case of an idol or Yayin Esech that's going to be sold by the Lova in order to get money funds to pay back the Malva, it's still not awesome. For Tanan, because we have it in Mishnah, that ger v'ovid kol chavim sheyarshu avim ovid kol chavim. If let's say there are two sons, biologically, to Mr. John Paul Jones. And one of them is Misgayer. And the one who's Misgayer says to the other brother, who's still a guy, he says to him, when dad dies and we have to divide up the inheritance, you take all the idols. I'll take non-idols. Tol ata avos kochavim vani mos. And dad left us hard cash, and I'll take the cash, you take the idols, and sell if you want to sell the idols. Or tol ata yayin esev vani peros. So is this kind of arrangement permissible, where the ger, who's now a full-fledged Jew, is gaining from the fact that the inheritance of the avodas kochavim, of the idols, is going to go over to his brother? So the Mishnah establishes the following rule: Im mishebo l'shus hager os. Now, what does this mean? Literally translated, it says that the idols or the wine came into the possession of the ger. It really means that although the ger never actually inherited these idols, he refuses to inherit the idols. Nevertheless, the idols are now located in the reshus of the ger. Now, obviously, at least for the moment, the ger is rotza b'kiyumo. He really wants the idols to stay in existence. Why? Because it's only through this barter deal, this exchange, that the ger will receive in his inheritance the money, the dough, whereas the idols will go over to his biological brother. And if b'chol zot, the Mishnah says that it is mutter. Again, mishabolu shus hager, that's something else entirely. But in the Reisha, we see clearly that it's mutter. And why? Because even though the ger wants the continued existence of the idols, but there's no violation of Torah law in the case of rotza b'kiyumo. That's only in the case of kilayim, according to Rabbi Akiva. So we have to add another important point over here, that in the Reisha, the reason why it's mutter is apparently because although he's rotza b'kiyumo, he doesn't do an action. And now the Gemara is bothered. Well, why then in the Sefer is it asur when the agreement was you take the idols and the wine and I'll take the money, and the idols and the money are in the reshus of the ger? Why should that be asur? You're going to tell me rotza b'kiyumo? He didn't do anything. There was no action. Amar Rava bar Ula masnisim b'avodas kochavim meschalekes lefi shvareha. Now, we're talking about idols that are made of gold and silver. When they're broken down, their expensive metallic element is worth money on the market. So therefore, they retain a certain worth even after they're broken. So therefore, let's think about the mentality of the ger. He really doesn't care whether the idols remain intact. Let them fall, break, and let somebody beat them up. I don't care. It still has value on the market. So Gemara says, Teidech avodas kochavim, but yayin nesef ma'ikla meimar. You could say that in the case of idols made of silver and gold, the ger is indifferent to whether they are whole or they're broken, because even the broken pieces are worth money on the market. But in the case of yayin nesech, if it breaks, it's gone. It's spilled wine, I guess you'd say. And the Gemara answers, no, it's cheres hadrayani. So cheres hadrayani apparently has a tremendous capacity to soak up the wine, and therefore, even if it breaks, the wine is still accessible from the broken pieces. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. Right, you might say that in the case of Yain Nesach, in these kind of very special utensils, earthenware, he couldn't care less whether it breaks. He's indifferent to breakage, but he still wants Bikiyum Hayayin. He doesn't want some Ganav to come along and steal the wine. So that itself should make him into Rotza Bikiyumo, but he didn't do any action. So therefore, the idols and the wine, etc., is mutter, because he didn't do an action to Rotza B'Kiyum. Now let's see, how do we plug this in to our case? Right, the idol worshiper owes an outstanding debt to the Jew, and he wants to sell his idols in order to repay his debt. So now the Jew is Rotza B'Kiyumo. How could that be mutter? The answer is it could be mutter because there was no action. Yeah, but what about the Sefer? When he says to him, the idolater says to the Jew, I'm going to sell these idols in order to pay you back the chov. Why is it also? I mean, there was no action. Elomar Papa Yerusha Sager Ka'amrit. The whole discussion here is because of the convert who's inheriting his non-Jewish father. And Shiny Yerush Sager de Akilu Beirabana. Gzeir Shem Yachzo Likulkul. Whoa, there's a lot of overlap of a lot of different factors here. There are two types of Yerusha. There's Yerusha Doraisa, which applies when a non-Jew inherits his father. And there's Yerusha Doraisa in a Jew that inherits his father. In the case of a ger, the ability of the ger to inherit his non-Jewish father is only d'Rabbanan. It's a rabbinic institution. Because on a Doraisa level, we have a principle called ger shenisgar kekatan shenolad dami. He's not related to any of his biological relatives, so he really can't inherit his biological father. But the Rabbanan made a takana that he's allowed to, but that the mechanism of that inheritance is different than inheritance Doraisa. So that the whole possibility that the ger will own the idols is all Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan decided that we're going to allow you to make this swap in which you'll take the cash and your biological idolater brother will take the idols. And if Yerusha would have been Doraisa, it would have been prohibited because what you're doing is you're getting the cash in exchange for the idols, which is Chalipe Avoda Zara, that's Asur. But since it's all rabbinic, the Rabbanan would like to get the situation where the idols get over to the idolater brother. And that's called in the language of the Shas, we're worried that this ger, since he was used to, and we've discussed this in the past, used to his whole life of idolatry, he might be tempted if he has idols to worship them. So we want to benefit from a setup in which the idols go over, they transfer over to the idolatrous brother.